Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
So if you notice this title in your podcast feed or your YouTube feed or anything like that, and you're a longtime listener of the show, you might be a little confused as to what we're doing here. Typically, we focus on one film at a time. We focus on the films of the National Film Registry, our usual format. This is a little different. So what are we doing exactly, and why are we doing it now? I mean, we've done some bonus stuff in the past, some bonus episodes tied into films we're covering on the show before, but that's typically talking about things related to films we're discussing that season on the show. We did one with King Kong. We did things like that. But this is not related to any film we're covering this season. So why now? Well, the stars sort of aligned here. Today's topic is the main character of a film we're covering next season. They're also the subject of a book that was just published, a history book late last year. And they are the focal point of a big, flashy new Broadway musical that just opened. So all of these things, it just kind of felt like this was the right time to step outside of our sort of one film an episode format and do something a little different. So what we're going to kind of do here is it's going to be one half a history lesson, kind of going into the nearly 100-year history of this character for those who are maybe unfamiliar. And then for the second half, it's going to be a review of that aforementioned new Broadway show for the folks who are wondering, does it actually do right by that aforementioned 100-year legacy, right? Our interest here, we're predominantly a film history program, so how does it do with that film history? But I think the best way to start it off is actually with a question. So, Kyle, what do you know about Betty Boop?
I know she's a cartoon, and that's about it. Truly, I thought about, as I knew we were going to do this bonus episode, if I had ever seen a Betty Boop episode, if I could recall one. I think my mom may have been a Betty Boop fan, but even her, I don't think, could remember a particular scene. So part of why I wanted to just jump into this is to really get that crash course history, because I recognize her iconography in the way that everybody can recognize Hello Kitty. But I cannot tell you what she's actually done or what kind of cultural impact she's had.
Well, that's kind of what we're going to do here. And it's not going to be just a lecture. I think we're going to kind of be a little more casual in how we discuss this. I think it's actually probably good that you're coming from that vantage point, Kyle, because I think we probably have a lot of people who, as you said, know the iconography, right? Like, I feel like this is a character visually inescapable on so much merchandise, in so many places, parodied a million times, and so on. But this is a character, the bulk of material that they did was in the 1930s. This is a character who, when you talk about, you said episodes, we're talking about film shorts. They start in 1930. By 1939, they're done. And there are revivals of the character. There's newspaper comic strips. There's TV specials later. There's even a Nintendo DS video game that is reported, I haven't played it, is reportedly not very good.
Oh, okay. That would probably make sense. Yeah.
And, things like that. But, for a character that basically only lasted the span of a decade in their prime, to endure nearly 100 years later is a fascinating thing. So I do want to get into that history. One thing I'm going to say up top, I'm just going to get this out of the way. Normally, when I do something a little more structured, I tend to cite my sources throughout. Since this is a little more casual, I haven't written out a script. I'm just going to get this out of the way up top for my own sanity's sake, in terms of the research material. And if anybody is so inclined and so interested, if you are interested, I'm just going to get these out of the way. If you're interested in animation history in general, Serious Business is a good little overview of that with a foreword by Chuck Jones that is pretty interesting. A lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today with regards to Fleischer Studios came from Wild Minds. But the bulk of this that we're going to be talking about, I mentioned up top, in late 2024, this got published. This is The Life and Times of Betty Boop, the 100-Year History of an Animated Icon by Peter Benjaminson. I was kind of surprised to find, for a character that's been around 100 years, there is not actually a lot of scholarship out there on the Betty Boop character. You know, when we do Mickey Mouse stuff, when we do Bugs Bunny stuff, I have a lot of books I can draw from, right? There's surprisingly sparse scholarship on Betty Boop. So if this does kind of cover the history for people who are intrigued beyond this episode, I will cop to the fact that I think every once in a while there's some factual things I might quibble with. It maybe generalizes a little more. And you know me, I like to get a little more specific.
For sure.
Sometimes it'll say things like, well, the Carnival Kid, the first Mickey Mouse cartoon. And I'm sitting here going, well, actually, the first one, you know, but whatever. You know, it's a slender but good resource on that. So before we even touch on that, I do think for our purposes, we should talk about Fleischer Studios. When we inevitably do the Betty Boop cartoon that we're going to do next season, which is Snow White from 1933, that's when I think we're going to get really deep into the Fleischer history. But I think it's worth talking about a little bit, especially because I actually didn't realize how underrepresented Fleischer Studios is in the National Film Registry. Kyle, you might remember earlier this year when we did our special about the new inductees, and you told us Koko's Earth Control got in.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's right.
And I believe you said Koko's Earth Control, and I said, oh, is that Koko the Clown? And you looked at me as though I had just spoken Aramaic, where you're like, it could be, I guess.
Sure, why not?
Who is Koko the Clown? I said that there were a bunch of Fleischers in. That's not true. I was kind of shocked to look into it and see how few Fleischer Studios cartoons made it in. The Betty Boop Snow White from 1933 is inducted in 94. The next one to get in is Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor, which is the only Popeye cartoon. Mm-hmm. That's from 1936. That's gets in 2004. And then the only other Fleischer Studios cartoon is Koko's Earth Control from last year.
Huh.
So there are no other Betty Boops in the registry, no other Koko the Clowns, no other Popeyes, and absolutely none of the Superman cartoons.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know, but like Fleischer is the studio behind those hugely influential Superman cartoons, right?
Yep.
And I'm sure you've seen none of them, right? The only other Fleischer-ish cartoon that gets in is, you know, Fleischer Studios is founded by Max and Dave Fleischer. After the studio goes under, Dave goes on to direct some other shorts. There is a Dave Fleischer directed animated short in the National Film Registry that is not from Fleischer Studios. It's for, I believe, Filmax Studios from 1957, and it is a cartoon you know.
It is?
Mm-hmm. Directed by Dave Fleischer. It's a cartoon you know and you've seen. I guarantee you've seen.
It's not Tom and Jerry, is it?
Nope.
I don't know.
I'll sing you a song.
Okay.
Let's all go to the lobby.
Oh, my God.
Yes. So technically, Dave Fleischer has another cartoon in there because of Let's All Go to the Lobby.
All right.
Which is something he does after the studio falls apart. You know Fleischer Studios. You know the look of Fleischer Studios, even if you can't necessarily put your finger on it. Because when you think about the history of animation, especially pre-Warner Brothers, pre-UPA, pre-any of that, you basically have two major studios that represent two very different styles. You have Disney, right, with what they're doing with Oswald and then Mickey Mouse and all of that. And then you have Fleischer. And maybe in the early days they're similar, but you know, in terms of like, yeah, in the early days, it's just funny animals bouncing up and down to one degree or another. But you can tell the difference And that difference comes out of more than just, an art style. There's an entire ethos that's different between Fleischer and Disney. Walt Disney is, as you know, the all-American kid. We've talked about Walt Disney on this show before. He yearns for his childhood in Marceline, Missouri. He moves out to California, and in the bright sunshine, and everything is bright and happy and fun and wonderful, right? Contrast that with the Fleischers, with Max and Dave and their family. The Fleischers come from Krakow. They come to New York and they are living in poverty, right? I think their father was a tailor, I want to say, Jewish tailor who loses his job. They grow up in New York. They grow up in immigrant neighborhoods and predominantly Jewish neighborhoods, right? And Max is so desperate to be an artist that his career begins when he goes to the Brooklyn Eagle. He goes to the Brooklyn Eagle and he begs them for a job. He straight up offers them. He says, "I'll pay you if you let me draw cartoons in your newspaper." He was trained. I should be clear. He was trained. He studied at Cooper Union. But he goes to the Brooklyn Eagle and they love his gumption. They go, "We'll pay you. Do some single panel comics for us." Fine. So Max does that. He starts making multi-panel comic strips. And then he and his brother decide we're going to make cartoons. Max Fleischer actually pioneers some radically innovative techniques in film and animation. This is kind of wild to me in a way that he does this and he doesn't get enough credit for it. Max Fleischer invents rotoscoping.
Oh,
Are you familiar, Kyle? Yeah, so you're familiar with rotoscoping?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, that's for our listeners and viewers, that's the idea of tracing over live action film to create more fluid motion, right? We talked about it when we did Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in our first season, right? The idea of tracing over the stuff. And you see rotoscoping used very prominently in a number of Fleischer shorts to come. He also invents another technique called follow the bouncing ball, which is whenever you watch a sing-along, right? The text will appear on screen and the ball will bounce. That is a Fleischer technique. Before they start making like a ton of full-on cartoons, before there's a Betty Boop, I think before there's even a Koko the Clown, the idea is we're going to film some people singing for the audience. At the theater, we'll put the words up and have the ball bounce so they can sing along, right? That's also a Fleischer innovation.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And they end up creating their own studio, Fleischer Studios, in 1929 here in New York. And if you're wondering, Kyle, where in New York was Fleischer Studios? Well, I'm happy to take you to the site of the old Fleischer Studios. You just have to like M&Ms, because Fleischer Studios was located at 1600 Broadway, which is now the site of the M&M store.
Oh, that's pretty bittersweet. I mean, on one hand, I do like my M&Ms, but on the other hand, there's not a single piece of Fleischer history where that M&M building is.
Not as far as I know. I mean, the M&Ms are wearing white shoes and gloves that kind of look like cartoon characters.
All right.
I don't know. Were there Cuphead M&Ms at some point? I'm trying to think of what's hip and new, because Cuphead, not Fleischer, but heavily influenced by Fleischer. Like that's what they're emulating
For sure.
So which
Now,
will be, yeah.
Would you say that Disney and Fleischer, and I hate to generalize it, but it might be helpful for some viewers. Would you say that Fleischer and Disney in some ways were the like Disney and Marvel of their times? Were they
DC and Marvel, you mean?
Excuse me, yeah,
Yes.
DC and Marvel.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. They were in direct competition. And there are references to this in a number of their cartoons. There is, I'll get to this, we can talk about it in a little bit, like the Fleischers kind of sneak a Mickey Mouse parody into one of their cartoons to kind of suggest how badly Mickey's word. Fleischer and Disney are in direct competition for a good long while, and it's not clear who's going to win. They are kind of at each other, and they're doing things differently. it's a little bit of a subversion, right? You mentioned DC and Marvel, but obviously, like, some people can be confused about who did what. It's interesting that, like, they kind of contrast each other in a lot of ways. The Peter Benjaminson book posits that part of that has to do with the fact, beyond their upbringing, right? Beyond, obviously, like, the all-American kid versus the Jewish immigrant kids, there's also something to the idea of Disney's cartoons are more wholesome, more optimistic, because they're all being made in the California sunshine. Whereas the Fleischer cartoons represent a different side of things, something that's a lot zanier, something that's a lot more abstract, something that's a lot kind of grayer and murkier and more cynical, because they're made in New York. And they are exposed to all of the walks of life that you have in New York. Now, that also means that a lot of these Fleischer cartoons rely on ethnic humor. But not... Some of them are just straight up, like, racist, send them to the ash heap history, but a lot of them are ethnic humor insofar as, like, things that I think if you watch it now, your first impulse is to go, is this anti-Semitic? Right? But the reality is it's being made almost entirely by Jewish animators who are making fun of their parents, right? There's shorts during the silent era that have Orthodox and Hasidic caricatures in them, right? Or feature a lot of jokes about kosher. But that's not being made from an outsider's viewpoint mocking. That's being made essentially by New York Jews for other New York Jews, right? And it's an interesting thing to see. In fact, Betty Boop herself, which we'll touch on, is Jewish in some of her cartoons. Her parents are just...
I'm sorry, only in some of them? She's selectively Jewish?
I'm saying that in certain cartoons she is depicted as having a family, and that family is explicitly Jewish, right? But another huge New York aspect of this. So Fleischer's first big star is Koko the Clown, which we talked about up top. Koko the Clown stars in a series of films called Out of the Inkwell. Because this clown will literally leap out of the Inkwell and walk around the real world. When you talk about the difference between Disney and Fleischer, one thing that's fascinating in a way is Fleischer's big hits early on are Out of the Inkwell, where this clown will jump out of the Inkwell and you have an animated clown walking around on live action footage of Max Fleischer's desk, things like that, right? Even in Coco's Earth Control, if you watch it, when the Earth gets warped, they show footage of people in the New York City streets, like stumbling and fumbling around. You get to see old New York in some of these shorts. Contrast that with Disney. Before Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Disney's big hit were the Alice shorts. And these, in contrast, are a live-action little girl in an animated world. So they're literally the exact opposite, right? One is the cartoon clown staring out the window of a skyscraper, and the other is a little girl in a cartoon world. But there's an extra New York connection, which I didn't realize, which is the look of Koko the Clown is based on Max's brother Dave, who worked as a clown at Coney Island.
Oh, whoa.
So that's where that connection comes from. These Koko the Clown shorts become popular, and in them, they give Koko a dog. A little dog named Fitz. If you watch Coco's Earth Control, which recently got into the National Film Registry, you'll see Fitz messing around. Slowly but surely, I'm not going to make this too much about pre-Boop Fleischer, but slowly but surely, Fitz gets morphed into a character called Bimbo the dog. Now, Fitz looks very much like a dog. He may walk on two legs, but he's a dog. Bimbo is more of a dog-human hybrid. Bimbo is a little bit more in line with what you'd expect from a Mickey Mouse or something like that. And Bimbo starts to overtake Koko, right? Bimbo now becomes the star as opposed to Koko. And in 1930, they want to make a short where Bimbo goes to a nightclub. It's called Dizzy Dishes, nightclub restaurant setting. And they decide there needs to be an attractive dog lounge singer that Bimbo should be attracted to.
Sure.
And so they bring on one of their animators, a guy named Grim Natwick, right? Now, I mentioned Cuphead would come back. Grim Natwick is the animator who designs Betty Boop. Now, when he designs it, it's a dog, right? He designs a dog, a lady dog with big jowls, long ears, but the hair that we all know, right? He brings that design to Max Fleischer, who says she should have a sexy lady body. Do a sexy lady body. So he draws this sexy
but keep the dog face?
The dog head, yes. Betty Boop is a dog in her earliest cartoons.
But he wants a sexy lady body.
A sexy lady body, yes. I apologize to you, Kyle. When this gets edited for video purposes, I'll have clips so other people can see it. I apologize. You are unable to conceptualize dog head lady body Betty Boop. The other thing that's crazy about this, by the way, that I never thought about until I was researching this is through the process of putting a lady body on this large round dog head, she doesn't have a neck. So Betty Boop just canonically does not have a neck.
So how does she keep her head on straight?
Like, you can, as in, like, there's a neck technically between her head and her body, presumably, but it's never drawn. And that means that's a real son of a gun if you're an animator, because the neck is a really good spot to have movement, right? If you ever watch those old Hanna-Barbera cartoons, right? Yogi Bear, Snagglepuss, any of those guys, the reason they all have neckties is so that you can then just animate the head and not have to draw a new body. Because it's like a perfect pivot point. But Betty, as you can possibly see her, no neck. Just
no neck.
The head on
all
shoulders.
Body.
Isn't that crazy? Now, who inspires Betty Boop? Who inspires this dog character is a subject of a lot of misinformation online. And I don't mean misinformation as in outright lies. What I mean is there are some just absolute falsehoods here, but we should talk about this for a second. You will occasionally see this thing circulated where they say Betty Boop was based on a black woman, right? And often accompanied, by the way, with an image that they claim is the original Betty Boop that is actually a white model in cosplay that is just shifted into sepia tone. It's a white Russian model. So it's completely detached from the truth. But there is a kernel of truth that a lot of people get wrong, which is Betty Boop's persona originates with at least one black performer. We'll touch on this a little more, but I want to make sure we talk about this for a second, which is people sometimes get this confused. And I understand because it's a little more complicated than people think. When Max Fleischer and Grim Natwick are conceptualizing Betty Boop, they are riffing on a performer who was popular at the end of the 1920s by the name of Helen Kane. Okay? Helen Kane is a white actress, right? And if you watch some of the early films that Helen Kane appears in, she has the same voice, right? The same Brooklyn-y accent. And wait.
You talk of sweetie, national sweetie. I got one of those. Oh, he's handsome as can be. But he worries me. Now this fool boy, he's no fool boy. But that boy knows he's up in his Latin and Greek. But in his shaking he's weak. 'Cause when I want some lovin', and I gotta have some lovin', he says, please, stop it, please. Oh, it's so unusual.
And when she would perform, she used the phrase Boop-Oop-a-Doop, right? Or Boop-Oop-a-Doop. That was her phrase. She was known as the Boop-Oop-a-Doop girl. You can find posters of her in films. She's the Boop-a-Doop girl, right? This ends up... Now, this is the kind of thing that would happen in cartoons all the time, right? Most of our favorite cartoon characters are riffing on popular stars of the time, right? When we did The Bank Dick, we talked about how many characters are riffing on W.C. Fields, right? That episode, the episode hasn't come out yet, but we recorded it talking about Bugs Bunny being an amalgamation of Groucho Marx and Clark Gable, and It Happened One Night. Everybody, Yogi Bear, Snagglepuss, they're all based on people. Betty Boop is riffing on Helen Kane. The thing, and why people say, well, she was a black character, is that Helen Kane took Boop-Oop-a-Doop from a black performer by the name of Baby Esther, right? Who would do Boop-Oop-a-Doop in her performances as a form of scat singing.
Sure.
Right? It's the same reason, we'll talk about it in a bit, but like Cab Calloway was known as the Heidi-Ho Man. Because in Minnie the Moocher, he does Heidi, 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 Ho. These people, some performers had like a signature scat line. Baby Esther was doing Boop-Oop-a-Doop. And then Helen Kane started doing Boop-Oop-a-Doop mixed with her style. So it's a dicey thing, and this ends up becoming relevant later. Because Helen Kane does actually bring a lawsuit against Fleischer, saying, you stole my persona and I should get royalties. And I think at first Max tries to be like, no, I just came up with the character whole cloth, and nobody believes that. And they end up bringing a recording of Baby Esther into court to prove, basically, Helen Kane was the only person in the lawsuit. She was the only person to bring suit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but Helen Kane's the only one to bring suit. So they realize, we don't have to prove that we came up with Boop-Oop-a-Doop. We just have to prove she didn't. And they do. The trial ends up having like 34, and I want to get the court transcripts because apparently a large chunk of this trial involves lawyers having to tell the stenographer how to spell Boop-Oop-a-Doop versus Boop-Be-Doop and Bebop-a-Doop. And like debating.
Oh boy.
Yeah. This is the 30s version of like, that plagiarism case with Vanilla Ice where he tried to argue that he didn't rip off Under Pressure. Do you know this?
I was thinking, what's funny is it's your generation. Yeah, what I was thinking of
really gotta just.
I was thinking of Ed Sheeran, to be honest, and when he had to come into court and be like, "Do you see these 4 chords? That's pretty much every song that you've ever heard." And then I'm like, yo, that's crazy that you're like actively sitting there doing like an hour-long medley of everything you've ever heard on the radio. With
Vanilla Ice, the whole thing was like Vanilla Ice was accused of taking the beat for Under Pressure, right?
Oh,
and his counter argument is no. See, their beat is bum 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 ba da da dum, bum 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 ba da da da, whereas ours is bum 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 ba da 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 da.
Oh,
Ice.
God.
Buddy, baby.
God.
Anyway, Betty Boop, back to Dog Boop, right? Let's go back to Dog Boop for a second. She is modeled after Helen Kane, but she's also just modeled after the flapper in general, which I think is pretty obvious. When you look at the dress, the garter, she's riffing on the flapper. A thing you might not appreciate if you don't have the sense of the timeline for it is that Betty Boop is riffing on a flapper after the time of the flapper. Right? There's already a nostalgia to the way that she's aping that style because she's introduced in 1930. The flapper's kind of gone out of style. And in their time, the flappers were not necessarily, liked by the mainstream. But by the time we reach 1930, that's kind of crystallized into a nostalgia. It's the same way you kind of see like hippies depicted in like the 70s, 80s, right? Where it's now become like a playful theme park version of it. And Betty is not necessarily your stereotypical flapper either. She's wearing high heels instead of the boots that are flapping, right? Hence the namesake. And also, as the book points out, as Peter Benjamin's book points out, how do I put this? The flappers really tried to suppress their top and torso area, keep that down so that they weren't going to be viewed for their assets. And when Grim Natwick draws Betty Boop, he absolutely draws her busty and curvaceous. This is deliberate in the design.
We're talking PS1 Lara Croft Tomb Raider graphics here.
Well, no. Here's the thing. More than that, you would be kind of surprised at how racy those early 30s Betty Boop shorts get. There are multiple opportunities where the front of her dress falls down, things like that, to really kind of give the audience a charge. But this is reflective of the style at the time as well. Benjaminson notes in 1932, Vogue announces spring styles say curves. So Betty Boop becomes essentially a curvaceous flapper, right? She is very much a product of her time, not just reflective of the 1930s, but also reflective of the nostalgia for what they would have called the before times, right? You know, think about kind of where we were at during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Mm.
Everybody kept talking about the before times, and we were nostalgic for things that happened 2 or 3 years ago.
Yep.
You know, we were looking at it and kind of going, man, what did I really have to complain about in 2017? You know what I mean? Like, there was that energy to it. This is the same thing. I want to know, because I think that, you know, they said, G. Michael Dobbs said of this that Betty, as she evolves, kind of represents a contradictory mishmash of hope and despair and a mix of domesticity and escapist excitement. You know, now, do you necessarily see this in Dizzy Dishes? No. They don't totally know what to do with this character at first, right? She is either appearing opposite Bimbo as like a temptress character. There was a phenomenal Fleischer short people should look up called Bimbo's Initiation, which is some real, if you like Cuphead, Kyle, that is some real Cuphead energy to that. It's Bimbo getting initiated into a secret society, and he enters into like a mystery house that keeps trying to murder him in various ways.
Oh, whoa.
Until multiple dog Bettys show up and tempt him. Get a lot of innuendo in these things. But they don't totally know what to do with her. They kind of, a lot of these shorts are just doing songs, right? This is popular in cartoons at the time, which is just like, let's just take an old song and animate it, right? Like Barnacle Bill is one that's just them just doing an old tune and repurposing it, right? These kind of, or there's one that's genuinely insane. I kind of blew my mind. It's called Kitty from Kansas City, which is half singer Rudy Valley just singing on film and half Betty being animated to match the lyrics. But this song is just about being in love with a woman who's stupid and fat.
Oh.
I don't mean that as I'm saying that derogatory. I mean, like, the lyrics are just like, you know,
stupid.
But really just like, she can't get any fatter. She's so dumb. And you're like, what the hell? Wow. What is this? It's really weird. Don't get me wrong. There are some funny little gags, and there's a line. I think it's she's so dumb. She's so dumb. I can't understand. She thinks that an Israelite is an electric lamp. I'm like, all right, good bit.
All right.
There's a lot of those little like riffs in there. She thinks Babe Ruth is a chorus girl, like stuff like that. And when you watch that, I'll say this: when you watch that, you come away looking at a short like that and thinking, this is what this character is sort of stereotyped as, right? People who don't know Betty Boop and don't know the history of this character maybe come away assuming that's the whole gag. The gag is she's sexy, she's ditzy, that's it. That's not actually true. As this character goes on and as this character evolves, when they finally get in 1932, they make a short called Any Rags, where she is finally fully human. Thank God, because Dog Betty is weird to look at. It's genuinely odd. But they turn the dog ears into hoop earrings. She's got a human face. She's just a human. She's still got this thing with Bimbo the dog. She's just a regular human. He's a dog. This is also the first recurring, if not, I would argue, the first recurring fully human character in cartoons. She's not a fantasy character. This is just a regular human being, which is very cool. Around this time, in addition to we've made her fully human, we're going to give her a human personality. Now, a lot of these shorts, yes, are about her being lusted after or pursued by men. But for the most part, she's not interested in them, right? Sometimes, occasionally she will, flirt back with some guy, but a lot of it is her kind of expressing an individuality. Is she flirtatious with Bimbo? Yes, but she's not somebody's wife. She's not somebody's girlfriend. She is not Olive Oyl. She is not Minnie Mouse, right? Who exists in contrast to Mickey Mouse. Betty doesn't exist in contrast to Bimbo. She very quickly becomes the lead of these cartoons. These cartoons also start to get a lot more surreal as they go on. Fleischer Studios were always known for making these a little darker, a little more surreal, but these are really influenced by post-jazz age New York, and you can kind of take from that what you will. In terms of, there is a short that I think was temporarily banned called Ha Ha Ha, where Betty becomes Koko the Clown's dental assistant and gives him laughing gas, and they all just get high off of laughing gas. And the gas leaks out of the cartoon and into real world New York, and everybody gets stoned, and the buildings start getting high. And you're like, yeah, I can see what this is.
Okay.
But the other thing that these cartoons start to introduce as they go on is black music. And I don't mean stealing it or co-opting it. I mean that Fleischer Studios actually starts to work with prominent black artists, most particularly Cab Calloway, who we've discussed on our show many times. Cab Calloway is in the National Film Registry several times over, including his home movies.
Is that a consistency across like their development, or did that come in rise of the lawsuit and having to work with?
Oh no, this is before the lawsuit.
Okay, so they were always kind of on the side of progress.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
to a certain extent at the
there's still some
time
stuff,
that can,
yes, it's reflective of New York in a way, right? It's reflective of the Fleischer animators. These are all young guys, right? Part of the reason, quite frankly, that a lot of these shorts are as sexually charged as they are is these are a bunch of young animators.
Sure.
These are a bunch of young animators with access to New York nightclubs and alcohol. This is what it's going to be, right? Like they are expressing what they're feeling, and they're expressing what the energy is. New York in this time is pretty freewheeling, right? Cab Calloway gets brought in to not just perform songs, but to be rotoscoped into these shorts, right? A thing I found fascinating is the fact that by 1932, 1933, Betty Boop has become so popular, sometimes they are advertising her shorts more than the feature films that they're about to appear before.
Oh, wow.
And as such, Paramount is willing to loan Fleischer studio space that they use for like their newsreels, that they use for some of their other stuff. They're loaning Fleischer studio space to bring in Cab Calloway, Louis Armstrong, great artists, and film them performing for the purposes of rotoscoping. But if you watch the first Cab Calloway collaboration is called Minnie the Moocher from 1932. And one of the things that's fascinating is beyond just it including Cab Calloway's music, the opening of all of these shorts would show Cab Calloway performing with his band, right? So if you watch Minnie the Moocher, the first thing you see before you see Betty Boop, before you see, Koko or any of them, is you see Cab Calloway in live action with his band. This is 1932, right? There is something that feels very impressive about this thing up front, just going, yep, here is a black man and his band. Right? Like this is what we're doing here. In Minnie the Moocher, it's and also Minnie the Moocher is where we meet Betty's parents. It's a sound cartoon, Betty Boop getting yelled at by her very, very German Jewish parents, clearly riffing on the Fleischer's own lineage, right? Where she and Bimbo decide we're going to run away to a cave out in the woods, and they encounter a ghost walrus, Don't ask me what to explain. I don't know why it's a walrus, but it's a walrus that is a rotoscoped Cab Calloway who proceeds to perform the song Minnie the Moocher. A lot of Minnie, you can watch Minnie the Moocher now and you'd probably just go, oh, this is cool and kind of fun. But again, to talk about the difference between Fleischer and Disney at this time, right? Pull up a Disney cartoon from 1932. You're not going to find anything even questionable in those, right? I love them, but you're not going to find anything questionable. Minnie the Moocher, in addition to being kind of haunted and weird, the lyrics of that song are explicitly about drug addiction.
Whoa.
He took her down to Chinatown and showed her how to beat the gong around is a reference to doing heroin. She fell in love with a bloke named Smokey. She loved him, though he was cokey. Is just cocaine, right? They do two more of these, one of which we will cover next season, so I'm not going to get too in the weeds of it now, which is Snow White, where in this instance, it's Koko the Clown who is rotoscoped as Cab Calloway. So you now have this great black artist voice coming out of one of their iconic characters. They do it again with a short called The Old Man and the Mountain in 1933. Also in 1933, it's a little thing, but also in 1933, that is when they decide to introduce not a new character per se, but the idea of like, oh, Betty Boop is so popular. Wouldn't it be fun if we took a character out of the funny pages and brought them into a Betty Boop cartoon, right? Let's animate a popular character from the funny pages. Do you have a guess who that might be, Kyle?
Who they animated with Betty Boop?
Mm-hmm. Who they pull from the funny pages to appear in a Betty Boop cartoon?
Probably Popeye.
That is correct. Popeye the Sailor. Popeye first appears on screen with Betty Boop and then gets spun off into his own series of, as you know, extraordinarily successful cartoons.
Huh.
But his first moving appearance is with Betty Boop. And it might have a bawdy joke in it that people can watch the cartoon and interpret for themselves what they're trying to imply at a certain point. Things are going well. Betty Boop is a huge success, right? Again, she's appearing above the feature films. What could go wrong? Now, we alluded to the lawsuit. The lawsuit is certainly a bit of a pickle, right? But they win the lawsuit, right? Can you think of anything else in the mid-30s, 1934 specifically, that might cause a problem for the Betty Boop cartoons specifically?
I mean, I feel like it has to relate in some way to the rise of Nazi Germany. Would I be wrong?
You are wrong.
Thank God. Okay.
But it does apply to the rise of government censorship.
Oh, no.
That's right. It's the Hays Code.
No.
Right. So remember, the Hays Code is introduced in 1930, but it doesn't really get enforced until 1934. And the Hays Code is about enforcing decency in film, supposedly, right? It's about, like, we need to get all of this sexuality out of our movies. We need to get all of this alcohol and drug use out of our movies. We need to get all of this subversive stuff out of our movies. If you are the people making Betty Boop, when the Hays Code comes along, it's amazing you don't just jump out of a window of that building that now hosts the M&M store, because there's nothing you can do in a way. What the hell? Like, right, one of the last Betty Boop shorts that comes out before the Hays Code is enforced is called Red Hot Mama, where Betty, in a nightgown that becomes a sexy dress, gets pulled into hell and, like, sexily dances with a bunch of devils.
Sure.
When Betty is in Hawaii doing a hula dance, she's wearing nothing on her top except for, like, a flower necklace. These are not things you can do post Hays Code. You can't have laughing gas spread throughout the town. You also can't have Bimbo the dog at all, because that's kind of bestiality in the eyes of the Hays Code, right? So what happens? Well, Betty is still allowed to be Betty Boop in one form, because around this time, King Feature Syndicate, the comic publisher, right, who owns Popeye and today, like Popeye, Blondie, the Phantom, Flash Gordon. Basically, if you like a comic strip now, it's probably under King Feature Syndicate, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them, Mutts and all of that, they're all in there. Mandrake the Magician, these kind of things. Beetle Bailey, all the stuff that I still read on the daily and have sent to my inbox. That's all under King Features. Well, King Features starts publishing a Betty Boop comic strip. And if you read that comic strip, it's almost like as soon as the Hays Code gets enforced in cinema, they start getting even more edgy with the Betty comic strip, because the Betty cartoons need to work their way around the Hays Code. But as you alluded, Kyle, the rise of Nazi Germany does factor into the comic strip. The comic strip has a character that is a satire of Adolf Hitler called Prince Okie-Doke, who shows up to try and win Betty's heart, and she just hates him. It's great. The comic strip is kind of wild. The comic strip becomes about Betty as a movie star, but the studio wants to sign her to an oppressive contract, so she keeps coming up with ways to avoid signing the contract. And it's like, it's fun because the gags are all about, like, everybody thinks she's so ditzy, but she's really just cleverly finding ways to not actually have to sign her rights away.
Yeah.
There's also a subplot of her trying to seduce what is I remember this is a 30s comic strip, what is an obviously gay man. She ends up developing feelings for a guy named, I think, Von Twinkle, who is more interested in being prim and proper, and she keeps trying to win him over. It's kind of nuts. That's what's going on in the comic strip. She's got a radio show at the same time, but in the movies, they panic. They need to figure out, what the hell do we do? Well, first of all, we need to find a steady boyfriend for her, right? We need to find a love interest for her because, you know, the Betty in the cartoons earlier, she dates a lot of guys. Maybe she's sleeping around with guys. You know, we can't have that. So they introduce Fearless Fred as a love interest. Terrible character. I'm just going to say it. Awful. I hate Fearless Fred. They then decide, well, we're getting rid of Bimbo, but she should still have a dog. And they create Pudgy. Have you ever seen Pudgy, Kyle?
I think I have.
Okay. Pudgy's a little white dog. For the most part, if you've ever seen like Betty Boop merch, she's got a little white dog with her a lot of the time. That becomes, in a weird way, if you talk to people who are like Betty Boop purists who love those early experimental cartoons, Pudgy is like the bane of their existence.
Oh God.
Pudgy, like they treat Pudgy like he's Scrappy Doo. But he's embraced by a lot of fans because he's a cute little dog, right? Around the time they introduce Pudgy, Betty is also now no longer wearing the short skirt. She no longer has the garter, right? A little garter belt. Now, longer dresses. A lot of the time she's wearing an apron. And she has moved on in the old cartoons. She was a pilot. She was a lion tamer. She had a lot of different jobs, right? Movie star. She even runs for president in 1932.
Does she win?
Boop for president. It's complicated because there's another Betty Boop for president in the 80s that she does allegedly win that election. In 32, that's a weird cartoon. We'll talk about it in a sec. But by the time the Hays Code rolls around, she's domestic, right? If we see her, she's a teacher. She's a housekeeper. She's, very much toned down, right? Pudgy the dog sort of starts to overtake things. A lot of the cartoons start to be about Betty as like a scolding mother type and Pudgy the dog getting up to misadventures, right? Then they invent a wacky grandpa character for her named Grampy. And Grampy is like an old crazy inventor doing like Rube Goldberg machines. He's I was about to reference a character, but number one, if I did, you wouldn't know who it was because it's an old comic strip character from the 20s. And number two, if I said the name, you wouldn't believe me that was a name of a character. I promise you.
Nope.
I'm going to try it.
Go for it.
Boob McNutt.
No way.
That is 100% a real character created by the actual man Rube Goldberg.
Man.
Boob McNutt was a popular comic strip character for a while.
I'd kill for an action figure of Boob McNutt.
He's in the public domain. You can just make one.
Oh, you just gave me the greatest idea.
So Grampy comes along, right? And again, when you look at them in contrast and you see like Betty and her wacky grandpa or Betty and her little dog, and you contrast them with things like the earlier shorts like Minnie the Moocher, like Poor Cinderella, yeah, there's a stark difference, right? But the post-code cartoons aren't valueless, and people kind of come to love them, right? Or at least appreciate them, right? They're not wildly unsuccessful. The Hays Code puts a damper on Betty Boop, but it doesn't fully kill the character. There's a two-pronged thing that sort of does. One is that they start struggling for relevance. For two reasons. One, they're pulling in other comic strip characters, hoping that they'll have the same success as Popeye, and they don't. They bring in like the Little King and Henry, the funniest living American, in shorts, and they're just not good. And the other problem is Betty Boop is a jazz age character, right? Everything about her screams jazz age. But jazz is on the way out and swing is on the way in. Now, this might be the part where Kyle, young whippersnapper that you are, you might hear me say jazz is on the way out and swing is on the way in and go, what is the difference?
Well, it don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
It's kind of like, I know it sounds a bit silly, but it's kind of like the shift from jazz to swing is almost akin to like if I were to play you 80s versus 90s hip hop, where like you'd listen to it now and you'd probably go, like if I played you like Grandmaster Flash and then Eric B. and Rakim, you would probably go, yeah, this is very similar sounding. But at the time when Paid in Full comes out, it's like this, nothing sounds like this, right? The shift to swing is similar. So there are a lot of Fleischer cartoons in the later period that are trying to capitalize on, like, oh, we're into swing now. There's a 1938 Pudgy-focused cartoon called Swing School that, in our household we love, don't get me wrong, but it's very much the energy of animators who were very into jazz going, oh, we can do swing now. We can do swing. Don't worry about it. It's just them like weirdly scat singing. They even at a certain point get so desperate. They're like, can we phase out Betty for a swing focused character? They have a short called Sally Swing. That is specifically Betty for some reason works at college now. And they're like, we need a swinging singer for our show. And she finds their new character, Sally Swing. Sally Swing is the opposite of Betty in every way. She is in a long dress, long blonde hair, very slender. It is like very pointedly, can we make a character that is the exact opposite of our lead character? If you're wondering, does that work? Well, I just point out to you, you've never heard of Sally Swing or seen her anywhere. She does not exist outside of this one cartoon. She does not matter. It's a terrible flop. So this grasp for relevance screws them. And the other thing that screws them is that in the face of the lawsuit, the Hays Code, everything, by the end of the 30s, Fleischer is getting kind of desperate, right? And they decide, we're going to move studios from New York to Miami. Maybe Walt Disney's got the right idea. Maybe we need some sun, right? The main voice of Betty Boop, she had a number of voice actresses over the years, but the primary voice of Betty Boop is an actress named Mae Questel. And Mae Questel refuses to move to Miami. She's just like, I don't want to do it. I'm going to stay in New York. Screw this. And so Fleischer goes, fine, we're just not making Betty Boop cartoons anymore. We're just done. We're just done. If Mae's not coming, like we're just done with the character. Goodbye. They produced like one last short in like 38 or 39 called Rhythm on the Reservation. And if you're wondering, that sounds like that might have some problems. It does. They finish up that short, and apparently what I have heard is that they offer Grim Natwick the rights to the character, and he turns it down, which he would come to regret because they end up selling the Betty Boop rights to King Feature Syndicate for a bunch of money. And obviously that character's still around. Grim Natwick probably could have made a pretty penny for that, but he turned it down. That's okay, though, as you might be aware. Did I mention this up top? Did I mention Grim Natwick is homaged in Cuphead? Did I tell you this?
Yes, I think
Okay.
so.
As the character Grim Matchstick. I did. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I'm losing track now. I'm getting old.
We've got at least 3 different Cuphead references so far, so don't you worry.
So they decide they're done with Betty Boop cartoons. Fleischer Studios as a whole will crumble pretty soon after, because their main competitor, Disney, at this point has produced feature films, right? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs comes out, and it's the highest grossing film of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Fleischer decides we can do a feature film too, and they produce Gulliver's Travels, and it's not very good. They try one more feature called Mr. Bug Goes to Town.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, everybody loves Mr. Bug Goes to Town. So it does not keep the studio open, and they sell it off. It becomes Famous Studios, and that's that. So again, Betty Boop has existed from 1930 to about 1939. You would think this character would fall to the ash heap of history, right? And quite frankly, if the character was as shallow as the detractors like to make it out to be, she would have fallen to the ash heap of history. But something happens. And it starts in the 50s and 60s. This is not dissimilar to what we talked about when we did W.C. Fields with the Bank Dick. If you remember on that episode, we talked about the fact that W.C. Fields, his work comes out in the 40s, falls out of fashion, and then college students start screening his films on campus. Similarly, the earlier Betty Boop cartoons, the ones with Koko, the ones with Bimbo, the ones that are about getting wasted and hooking up and getting stoned, those start playing on college campuses in the 50s and 60s. And they gain a lot of traction on those campuses. See if you can do the math to figure out why, right? I don't necessarily think it's the pudgy-focused cartoons that are really popping with the college crowds at that time. Don't get me wrong. Again, I love Pudgy. He's a sweet little pup. But those cartoons start gaining popularity on college campuses. The studios start to take notice, and they start going, can we come up with more stuff for Betty, right? Let's start rerunning the cartoons. Let's come up with some things. And this character kind of lingers in the consciousness. In the 80s, there becomes a lot of nostalgia for the old days. And so they at first decide we're going to make let's make a Betty Boop special called Betty Boop for President. There was already the 1932 cartoon, but they decide it's 1980. A Hollywood star is running for president. We can make a VHS tape of Betty Boop running for president by re-editing her old shorts. It's terrible, for the record. The 1980 Betty Boop president is a nightmare of a show. They try and do a TV special in the mid-'80s with Betty to try and revive the character. That has some juice, but not a lot. What ends up kind of being key to this character's resurrection is a brief cameo in the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. You remember this, I'm sure. Everybody does, despite the fact that it's not much of the film. But Betty Boop is in the nightclub, the Ink and Paint Club, as the cigarette girl. And there is, interestingly enough, voiced by Mae Questel. The original voice of Betty Boop. She returned, despite the fact that she was in her, I think, 80s at that point, and would die maybe 5 years after that movie comes out. She returns as Betty Boop and has this line about, I still got it, Eddie, and all that. And this, in tandem with, they launch a new comic strip, and there's a I think 1989 TV special called Betty Boop's Hollywood Mystery that is actually pretty good. If people are looking for something, it's very much in the vein of, you might have been too young for this, I don't know. Do you remember, Kyle, the Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat?
It sounds kind of
familiar. It's like a mid-90s Felix the Cat cartoon that was very fun. Had a lot of Klasky Supo energy. People that did like Rugrats and all that.
Sure, okay.
Similar, or like Teacher's Pet. Do you remember Teacher's Pet?
Oh, Classy Supo. That's what that guy says in the... I had no idea. Wow, you just solved a 30-year mystery for me. Thank you.
Well, this is what I'm here for. But that's kind of what that kind of brings it back. And by the 90s, Betty Boop is all over merchandise everywhere. Becomes this hugely popular character all over again. The iconography is there, even though they're not producing a lot of new content. Right?
So in some ways, Boop herself became an Easter egg that everybody loved and revitalized to relevancy.
In a way, it's an interesting thing because it's like the character is in the Macy's parade. Again, they have cosmetics deals for the character and everything, even though, again, the majority of the content is from 1930 to 1939. It's not like there's a revival in terms of like, when Disney does like, oh, we're going to do new Mickey Mouse shorts or we're going to do new Looney Tunes cartoons.
Where would you say that this is in line with the attempts to revive Garfield in the mid 2000s?
Well, I mean, obviously Garfield's a more recent character. Garfield is from, comes out in the late 70s, early 80s, something like that. Garfield never really goes away is the thing, right? Because Garfield had the Garfield and Friends cartoon, with U.S. Acres and all that in the 90s. And then there's not really a revival so much as it took them a while to get a Garfield movie off the ground.
Mm.
There isn't a period where, there wasn't a Hays Code that shut down Garfield. You know what I mean? And then, again, this Betty Boop character has just kind of never really gone away since. Even though we're now in a time where the iconography is more well known than the content, which is such a fascinating thing. And I say that because that ends up kind of tying into what we're going to talk about in our briefer second half, which is for, I think, 10 or 20 years, they had been trying to make a Betty Boop stage musical. I know for 10 years, like, the actual core team that produced the show was working on it. And it got stalled for a number of different reasons and only just opened this month. And I think it's a fascinating thing, in a way, not just the show itself, but the way people are reacting to it in terms of, are they reacting to the actual character, or are they reacting to what our perception of the character is, divorced from the actual history of the character? And so I want to get into that in our second half. But before we do that, one little thing.
I'll be right back.
If you're planning to see the new Betty Boop musical on Broadway, here are 5 old school Betty Boop shorts you may want to check out. From 1930, Dizzy Dishes. This is the introduction of Betty Boop. Don't be alarmed. She is half dog in this one, but she's still the character that you know and love. Number 2, you're going to want to check out Betty Boop and Grampy. That is from 1935. That is the introduction of her grandfather, the inventor Grampy, who also factors into the show. The other core Betty Boop character that appears in this show is her dog, Pudgy. Now, if you want to meet Pudgy, there are some other shorts that Pudgy's involved in, Little Pal, things like that, but I would recommend checking out from 1938, Swing School. He does a little dance in it. It's cute. There are a bunch of other animals. If you're into talking animals, this is going to be the short to check out. There are 2 more you're going to want to check out that are relevant to the plot, and I won't spoil it. But if you've got the time, look up The Old Man of the Mountain from 1935 and Betty Boop for President from 1932. Just don't watch the Betty Boop for President from 1980, because that is just fucking awful. So those are the shorts to check out if you're going to go see the Betty Boop musical, or if you're not going to go see it, check them out anyway. They're a lot of fun.
Yes, my goose has been cooked now. Here I'm going to be hooked now. 'Cause the last time I looked now, I'm where I want to be.
So from cartoons in the 30s to 2025, let's actually talk about Boop the musical. This is something kind of new for us in a way, right? In terms of, we are a podcast about films and films in the National Film Registry. Doing a theater review might seem odd. But when I first heard about this show, I was so intrigued from our vantage point specifically, which is our audience are film history buffs, right? Our audience are people who are fascinated by the history of cinema. And in this instance, you have a character with notable iconography who's also a part of the National Film Registry, who is a part of animation history, now being translated into not just live action, but being translated into a completely different medium. The questions are, how does it work? And also, how does it treat this character? How does it respect that film history? These are the things that I thought were interesting. And just in general, as a fan of Fleischer stuff, as a fan of this character, I wanted to champion this thing. You know, I really wanted to go to bat for it. I was in touch with some people from the production before the show even launched with this idea of like, hey, anything I can do to kind of, you know, help get the word out about this would be great. And then the show opened, and the audience reception was such that they do not need my help at all. People seem to be really enjoying it and having a good time, and tickets are selling, and the reviews are positive. So, yeah, they don't need my help, but I'm here anyway to do this and to talk about this. By the way, Kyle, get this. I don't know if you realize this. Not only is Boop a National Film Registry character, I guess you'd say, that is on stage right now, not the only one. I realized in a very odd thing. I walked out of the theater for Boop the Musical and stared straight at a production of Sunset Boulevard that is right across the street.
That's
which
right.
we covered in our first season.
Yeah, I would love to see that show. It's been on my list for a very long time.
Well, that is the other reason that we're doing this in this particular format too, is that you are a theater person.
I'm a kid in theater. Yeah.
You did theater. You go to the theater. This is something that, you know, is something that you're invested in as well. Though you have not seen the show yet, correct?
I have not. No.
So instead of this being a review for a broader audience, essentially this is also just a review specifically for you. You can kind of ask whatever you're wondering about and so on with regard to this production. I did, you know, I saw it during press previews. It is now opened. It's now, you know, on stage. As we're recording this, I don't think Tony nominations have come out or anything like that. I don't even know if they will have come out.
It'll be May 1st.
May 1st? Okay, so this will be released before the Tony nominations come out. So I will just say this right from the jump. If the young woman who plays the lead in this show, Jasmine Amy Rogers, if she does not receive a nomination for this show, I would like to invite anyone who did not vote for her to meet me in a parking lot and let's square up.
Wow.
Like, if you're going to, like, legitimately.
Now, nomination or win? How strongly are you fighting or conversing in this parking lot?
Right. Here's the thing. I have not. Oh, if we're I'm from Long Island. If we meet in a parking lot, we're not fucking talking, buddy. Okay. Okay, this is like if I'm saying meet me in the Adventureland parking lot, you know where this is going. All right, we ain't talking, buddy. We ain't talking.
Where's that Tony nom?
You know, listen, I don't care. I think I could take most theater critics. I don't think Jesse Green though. I've thought about this. I think if I could, I don't know if I could confidently take Jesse Green. I've thought about this. I feel like I might have to let his opinions be. I think he could deck me. I'm just being real with you. But anybody else, like, let's square up. No, I think nomination. I haven't seen all of the shows. I don't get to the theater as often as I would like and as I used to as a younger person. And I understand there are strong performances this year, but this young woman is remarkable. And I enjoyed the show thoroughly. I will talk more about, you know, I like a lot of the people in the show. But even if you come away and this thing does not work for you, right? Even if the cotton candy that is this show just really gets at whatever cavities you've got, this young woman is just incredible, and you know, not only should be in more shows going forward, but like this is somebody who you walk away and at least for me, you're like, movies, television, like they should be out there. The closest thing I felt in terms of like, it was a real it was akin to like, for me, as a film person, akin to like 2 years ago with Lily Gladstone popping up in Killers of the Flower Moon, where you're just like, you should be in everything. You should be doing comedies and dramas, and you should be on television and movies and like, this is just where were you all of this time? Like, what the hell? This is somebody that you cannot believe is so young, and that this is their first time on Broadway, and that you genuinely can't believe it. Just absolutely phenomenal. Great comedic timing, such a gosh darn star. I mean, just utterly remarkable. So,
Let me ask you a question right off the bat here, because I want to know, you're dealing with a show like Boop. We've just spent the last hour talking about the iconography, the history. There may still be, I don't really know what the demographic breakdown is in terms of Betty Boop fans, but there might be some fans that are still relevant for it. How does this show reach across the aisle and honor those that still to this day find a place in their heart for Betty Boop? And simultaneously, how does it get the next generation or the younger generations that are likely not as familiar or at all familiar with Betty Boop or Fleischer, and encourage them to see this show or this character presented in a way that's never been done before?
I think it's interesting you say that, because I do want to address real quick. So the reviews came out for this show, and occasionally you would see from the more mixed reviews a comment that drives me up a wall, especially when it comes to musical theater, which is anytime you see somebody go, well, who was asking for this, right? Well, who was asking for a Betty Boop musical? And I just want to go, what do you mean? Who was asking for any of this? Can you point to most of the successful Broadway musicals of the last 30, 40, 50 years and go, people were clamoring for that? No. What are you talking about? Who was asking for rapping Founding Fathers? Shut up. Just shut up. What do you mean? Who was asking for, like, I'm sorry, who was asking for, people were clamoring for an Alison Bechdel Fun Home musical. Shut up. What are you talking about? This is the only medium today where who was asking for this is completely irrelevant. What do you mean? Who was asking for what? What are you talking about? Right now, Floyd Collins is running on Broadway. Are you telling me there were people going, great, that should be a musical? Absolutely. That's what I buy as a musical. Shut up. What do you mean? Who was asking? Drives me up a wall. Because why would you ask that? Like, look at the entire career of, like, pick anybody you want, like a Rodgers and Hammerstein or a Stephen Sondheim, and go like, yeah, people really wanted a George Seurat musical. Shut up. What an annoying thing to say. I know that doesn't answer your question, but that just drives me up a wall to see that, right? Or to suggest that, because at the end of the day, for me, when you're asking that question of like, how does this honor that? You know what it does? It does something similar to a different Depression era character that was decades later turned into a musical, which is Annie. Mm-hmm. The comic strip Little Orphan Annie turned into a 1977 musical that was also like, it's 1977. It's like, hey man, the economy's bad. Everybody's angry. Everything kind of sucks right now. Look at this little redheaded girl from the Depression. She made us happy, right? Similarly, like, this kind of taps into a similar vein of like, hey man, you know this character, you know what they look like, and they're gonna make you feel good for like 2 hours. We're just gonna have fun, right? You can go into this show and presumably have no base of knowledge for this character, right? Other than I've seen them on t-shirts. And the most you would need to do is a bit of deductive reasoning of, oh, I guess she has a grandpa who invents things, right? You don't need to have necessarily seen a lot of these cartoons. There are references, but you don't need that base of knowledge, right? I think it would be the same thing as if you went to go see Annie, as I did as a child, right? I remember going to see Annie as a little kid. It was a production going on. We went to see it, and I remember sitting there in the seats and kind of going, a lot of FDR in this for some reason. Why is FDR a character? That's odd. And like, obviously, if you know the history of the character, it makes more sense. Similarly here, one of the things that I was so impressed by is that I'll be honest, I kind of went in expecting like a very surface level understanding of this character, right? I went in expecting I was going to get a show that played the character as kind of the broad strokes version of it, right? Which is the silly kind of ditzy sex pot that some people imagine it as, right? And some people think that's all the character is. Again, one review I saw was like, well, where's all the sex? And it's like, again, shut up and meet me in a parking lot. But for me, sitting there and seeing all of these little Easter eggs throughout it, right? It is very clear that the people writing this thing do actually know the character's history. There are overt references to shorts. There are explicit references to being a dog at one point and things like that. Obviously, just the presence of Pudgy and Grampy, you know, these are from these later shorts that are probably lesser screened now. But even the stage setup, I think I can say this without spoiling anything, everybody. Before the curtain even rises, if you look on the corners of the stage, they have these illustrations that have Koko the Clown and Bimbo the dog and all of these old Fleischer characters. They're all kind of up in the rafters. You know, Koko is not in the show, but like he's over in the corners. They utilize screens to a great degree, which I know some people have some qualms with. They would want more practical sets, but the screens are used to very effectively, I think, merge cartoon and live action. But they also include a lot of little Easter eggs. I clocked at one point, there's a great opening number, and I know you're probably supposed to be paying attention to the performers, but I clocked that over in the corner of a set, there are film canisters on the set that contain titles of various Fleischer shorts, like Out of the Inkwell and things like that. There's a cast list on a wall for one scene that lists Fearless Fred and Sally Swing and all of these like obscure characters. There's again, this opening number that Betty Boop has where she sings about all of these different jobs she does, right? Where she says, I'm a lion tamer and a pilot, and listing all of these jobs. That's very effective if you're just sitting there because it's establishing like Betty Boop as an actress has played all these different roles, right? But if you're a film history nerd, if you're a person like me who watches cartoons from 100 years ago, you just sit back and go, I know that short. I know that cartoon. Like these are all actually mentioning jobs that she had held in real cartoons, right? So there is, she mentions, I was a race car driver. That's in Betty Boop's Kerchoo. I was a lion tamer. That's in Boop-Oop-a-Doop. I was a judge. That's in Judge for a Day. There's all these different things that are all specifically from these shorts. So there is a lot of that. And there's even, again, other Easter eggs. There's a character in the show. Their plot line is wanting to go to have an internship at Cooper Union, right? Because they want to be an artist. And they want to intern or get a summer program at Cooper Union. That line is given out on, is set on stage, and I guarantee you 98% of the audience, if not more, just goes, okay, yeah, Cooper Union. That's a place in New York where you can study art. But that's also where Max Fleischer studied, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't have to include that. They could have just picked NYU or anything out of a hat, but there is that specificity to it.
Sure.
So all that as a long-winded answer to your question is like, I was surprised how much this actually cares about the entirety of the 100-year history of this character.
Yeah.
'Cause it didn't have to satisfy the majority of the audience, and if you look at the way that the show is being marketed, and if you look at the audience that it is bringing in, its families, its kids, and I get it, like that's the good play to make, instead of just going, hey, you people that still watch old 16 millimeter films, families are a broader audience than that. But as somebody that knows this history, I was genuinely surprised at how much care went into actually interpreting and representing the history of this character. You know?
Sure.
And that extends to, as I mentioned, let me just acknowledge one qualm that I have. Okay, can I register a complaint? Is that all right?
Sure. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know who I'm going to take it with. So sure, you can file it
Okay.
here.
So in addition to, as I mentioned, Jasmine and Rogers, they have a stacked cast. Pudgy, the dog, Betty's dog friend, is puppeteered by a guy named Philip Huber. Philip Huber is a legend of puppeteering. Probably a lot of our listeners and viewers would know his work primarily from Being John Malkovich.
Oh,
Right. But Philip Huber is a legend, and he has built and puppeteers this Pudgy puppet, who is a gosh darn star. And when I say I have a complaint, my complaint is similar to the Simpsons comment about Poochie, which is, when they say whenever Poochie's not on screen, the other character should be saying, "Where's Poochie?" That's me in the audience in terms of like, I think Pudgy's in a lot of the show more. I think Pudgy should be there more. I think we should see more of Pudgy. Pudgy should do more things, and I should be able to pet Pudgy.
this is a pro Pudgy podcast. You've heard it here, folks.
Add a VIP tier level where I can pet the dog after the show. That's what I'm asking for. I think that's a fair complaint. He's a good pup. But yes, it's, I don't know. It's just, so much of it is just deeply endearing. I think that's the biggest takeaway from it. It's deeply endearing. It's a very old school musical, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean that in is like the numbers, a large amount of the numbers are conceived to just be dazzling show-stopping numbers. There's a big Busby Berkeley influence in it. A lot of tap and top hats and canes.
Hell yeah.
And I had a blast with that for two reasons. One being, I love those old Busby Berkeley musicals anyway. And also, and this is something I think, Kyle, maybe you'll sympathize with, perhaps not, but I feel like when we were coming of age and we were theater kids, right? It felt really cool when, instead of the deluge of typical musicals of the day, occasionally they'd be like, yeah, our musical is based on an old time massacre that happened. Like, our musical is actually based on a sad historical event. And you'd be like, that's dope, right? That's cool. You're doing something interesting with the medium, right? Like, oh, our play is actually based on like an 1800s dark German drama. Hell yeah, man. Right. And all of that. And like, oh, well, this show doesn't have any like show-stopping numbers. Instead, it's got a lot of points where like a guy is going to have a solo where he goes, and you're like, hell yeah. And now there's so much of that. There's too much of that. And I do find myself kind of going, who does this play to beyond like theater kids specifically, right? There is a part of me, I'm not trying to like dunk on anything in particular, but it's kind of akin to like how exciting, to put it in film terms for our people, like how exciting A24 felt when it first broke. And it was like, here is this small independent distributor that is letting these filmmakers do whatever the hell they want, right? And they're picking interesting stuff and they're putting money behind it. And it's like, hell yeah, right?
Yeah.
The idea of like an A24 horror movie was like, oh, this feels different. And now the idea of an A24 horror movie is like a very specific thing that you can parody and lampoon. And it's like, maybe not everything needs to be this.
Sure.
Maybe I kind of just want to see the new Final Destination where a bunch of young people get, blown up in various ways. They don't all have to be a metaphor for grief, right? That's part of what I found so refreshing is like this is just like, no, we're gonna be a night. We're gonna have some showstoppers. We're gonna have some lavish choreography. We're gonna be a nice 2+ hour distraction. I came away so delighted by that because, again, I don't know. I feel like there was a point in time where we went through this period from like the mid 90s on where like so many musicals were just trying to be Rent, or so many musicals were trying to play only to a musical theater crowd, right? That's not me criticizing musical theater fans, right? At all. I happen to be one to one degree, but I do think, like, I'm sure you've encountered, there's a certain type of fan where I'm like, do you think the show is good, or do you just think it gave you good audition songs to do? You know what I mean? Like, do you
Sure.
think the show is good, or do you just see a role that you would like to play? Right?
Sure.
And I feel like we went through a period where that wasn't happening anymore. There was like this, maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like when Book of Mormon won the Tony in like 2011, it felt like something was shifting a little bit, right? Not only did that play to out-of-towners really well, but it was something different. The South Park guys made a musical, and none of it felt like, oh, this is somebody's audition song, right? None of it felt like this was designed for theater camps. And then the next year, Once wins Best Musical. That's a very different show than Book of Mormon. It's a very different show than what else was playing. The next year, Kinky Boots wins. A little bit more traditional, but like you got Cyndi Lauper doing the music. Great. The next year, I think, was Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. I enjoyed that show quite a bit. Admittedly, that was always going to be a bit niche. And the next year, I think, I could be getting my days wrong, but I think the next year, everybody expected An American in Paris, which we covered on this show, or we will cover on the show. I think that episode comes out after this one. American in Paris, everybody thought that was going to win Best Musical, and it ended up going to Fun Home. This intimate graphic novel adaptation about a young lesbian coping with her father's death. That's totally different, right? Yeah. And that does not exist to create audition songs. And that felt cool as shit. And then the next year, maybe I'm missing all, but like the next year, Hamilton, right? And it really felt like for a solid half a decade, this medium had gotten out of the clutches of that one particular type of musical, right? It really felt that way, and it felt exciting. I was going to the theater a lot more for that reason. I was very interested in like watching this medium grow. And then for me, and maybe I'm disparaging things, but then the next year it went to Dear Evan Hansen. And I remember seeing that and just going, oh no. Oh, this is very much an audition song thing for me. Like this is very much like, again, what is the show? It's a young man coming out and going, Hana, 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 Hana. Oh no, we're doing this again. That's speaking to me. I'm not saying this necessarily, but like it did almost feel like for us, like we were so close to this kind of getting a more broad appeal. Everybody was at least tangentially aware of Hamilton, right?
Sure.
This stuff that was only in New York was attracting the attention of the whole country again. And then it felt like something was just getting pulled back and like, no, this is our thing again. No, this is only going to play to us. And I feel that push and pull consistently.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel you. Look, I'm sure it's akin to how I'm sure we feel whenever we're hyping the Oscars and we're sitting there going, yeah, of course, Honora got nominated for Best Picture. And most of the people in our lives who don't see movies every single week in the way that we do go, what's an Honora? And then fast forward to when it wins going, oh, it was probably a good movie to watch since it was recognized so much. So, and again, it's not always, I think I think you'll always have those types of shows, I mean, for some people, Hamilton, because it's not something that, well, back then it was so new and so different that everybody loved it. And now because it's so part of the zeitgeist, it now feels almost too popular in a way. So I don't know. I don't think there's. I definitely hear what you're saying and like the ebbs and flows. It is also funny that you bring up Fun Home, considering that is a show that was written by a Kalamazoo College alum. So it was most definitely going to college. Was most definitely a show that everybody was using for auditions because we ended up being the first college to produce that show once it got off Broadway. So I do hear what you're saying. I think at the end of the day, I mean, I feel like every medium seems to fluctuate that way. I mean, I can't remember the last time, well, maybe I guess this past Grammys, right? But usually, how many times does a Grammy winner win Album of the Year? And you go, yeah, of course, obviously, 9 times out of 10, you go, sure. I don't know what a Casey Musgraves is, but I
mean,
guess
I'm saying it less just. I'm saying more like, to me, one of the things I found so refreshing about seeing this in particular, right, and this show in particular is it's not interested in chasing whatever the trend is at the moment.
sure,
Right?
yeah,
It's not. There's so much stuff. When I mentioned like the everybody was trying to be Rent for a while, right?
Mhm.
So much of that stuff feels dated now, right? So many of those things that are trying to ape this, you now just watch and go, well, that feels very 90s.
sure,
Everybody was trying to. It's like, to bring it back to movies for a bit, like it is kind of like everybody, after Pulp Fiction came out, how many of these movies of like Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead or Destiny Turns on the Radio, where you're like, oh, this just feels so dated now, right? Because
sure.
it's trying to chase the trend. When I saw this, I mean, when I say pleasantly surprised, like the music's by David Foster. Like the music is by a legend whose work at like I think in the playbill, his biography just very casually drops the metric blank ton of Grammys that he has won.
Yeah.
And also wrote the song for Karate Kid 2, which is important to me. And did some work on George Harrison's 33 and a Third, which is an underrated George Harrison record. And I understand if we're talking David Foster, most people are probably going to go to like Thriller, but I'm going to go 33 and a Third. And some of the work he did with Chicago, all excellent. In any event, you've got David Foster doing music, so it's gonna be good. But I was just so taken by the fact that like it genuinely was more interested in making music that fit this character and this world than chasing the trend. And considering how many things sound like they're chasing the trend, I found that deeply, deeply refreshing.
Let me ask you this, since you did mention that some people might either gravitate towards the show or maybe are just interested in certain songs or whatnot. Because my day job is in theater licensing, and because it is not interested in, I guess, this cookie cutter man and or woman singing to the audience that you've highlighted here, does that make the show more or less licensable or approachable for a younger audience? Because sometimes when I'm navigating, talking to different companies and or schools about what type of show they're interested in putting on, it's usually either dictated by a theater person who says, I don't give a damn what my demographic is, I'm going to do this show and I'm going to figure it out, or it's dictated by the limited amount of students that you have. And so if they're interested in show X, you better believe it's going to be show X. And so do you believe that Boop, what sort of licensing power do you see Boop having?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I think, it lends itself in a lot of ways, despite the fact that you can do it with a big price tag attached. If you really want to go all out for showmanship, it strangely lends its, or not strangely, it does or will eventually lend itself to the kind of the community theater productions and the smaller productions, because I want to be clear when I say it doesn't have the guy singing at the edge of the stage, I don't mean it doesn't have genuinely good kind of solo character numbers.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It does. They just are powerful and they have strong vocals to them instead of I mean, the numbers that they give Jasmine Amy Rogers as Betty are just an absolute knockout, and that's a real testament to her. She gets a couple of. She closes Act 1 on the song that they've kind of been pushing. It's the one song I think that's available on streaming now called "Where I Wanna Be," which she sings at a jazz club. That is a showstoppery number, and it's good, it's strong, it's powerful. It really it sends you into intermission having a good time. So much so that I was headed to the men's room during intermission, as one does, because there's no line for the men's room at most Broadway musicals. God bless it. We love it. I was walking into the men's room, and after that number, and the guy behind me, I heard him just go, "I'm going to go see it again." Like he was just like, he finished acting, he's like, "Yeah, I have to go see it again." So it lends itself to that because each character does get a moment, right? Which is what you're looking for if you're doing like a local production. And there are some, older characters. There's the grandpa character of Grampy, and he is given a love interest in this show as well, named Valentina, and they get a little duet that's very, how because you're talking about licensing and that kind of thing. Like it's almost like when you're doing a community theater production. If you were doing Gigi, you want to have your "I Remember It Well" number,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
For Maurice Chevalier to do. They have one of those. They get a little number that Pudgy the dog is also involved in. I can't stress that enough. This is also a part where I should mention the one thing that shows that I am not a theater person at heart and that I'm a film person at heart. So again, I mentioned they have a great cast for this show, right? They have some phenomenal people in it, right? In this female role of Valentina, the love interest for Grampy, this show in the cast that it currently has an actress named Faith Prince. Now, people who are predominantly theater people are going to hear that and go, of course, Tony-winning actress Faith Prince has been nominated for 4 Tony Awards and won one. This is a person with an excellent theater pedigree. And that's what the theater people are thinking. But I immediately opened my playbill and saw that name and went, Faith Prince? Why, of course. She played the girlfriend of villain Eddie Arcadian in the cult semi-blaxploitation martial arts movie The Last Dragon, produced by Barry Gordy. And I spent the entire show just thinking to myself, how many people in this room are thinking of The Last Dragon? But I
Just
am.
you, man.
Just me. You know The Last Dragon. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I know
before.
of it. I was going to say I know of it. Like Betty Boop, the iconography is timeless. But
you saw Sorry to Bother You, right?
I did see
okay.
Sorry to Bother You. I do
and you remember how in Sorry to Bother You, oh my God, I'm forgetting the actress's name now. Help me out here.
Zazie Beetz?
No. Who's the actress? She's in Thor as well.
Oh my God, Tessa Thompson. Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
So Tessa Thompson's character in Sorry to Bother You does a performance art piece where she repeats the monologue from Last Dragon. This is a scene in the film. That monologue was originally delivered by Tony winner and Boop the musical cast member Faith Prince.
Hell yeah.
Which rules. Strangely not mentioned in her biography in the playbill. Somehow The Last Dragon does not come up. But if she comes on the show, all we will talk about is The Last Dragon.
Well, we can make that happen.
Well, yeah, we can. I'm sure we can make that happen. No, but they all around a great cast for the show should be mentioned. Like just legitimately everybody great. The man that they cast as her love interest, Betty Boop's love interest in this show, was Ainsley. I'm going to mispronounce this. I'm so sorry. He's got an Australian name. Ainsley Melham, I'm going to say.
Sure.
Let's go with it. Terrific. Loved him. And, in terms of fully human Betty Boop love interests, his Dwayne is number one, right? Number one. I put him above Fearless Fred. I put him above, all this. Gonna be honest, below Bimbo. No disrespect. But Bimbo, the dog human, still number one in my heart. But Dwayne, excellent. The guy playing him, excellent. everybody in it kind of gets what the show is, which is it's broad. It winks to the audience, right? It plays to the crowd. It understands we're doing a cartoon musical. Like, let's just have fun. And it's a plot wise, without spoiling anything, Betty Boop comes to the real world, which is people have drawn comparisons to the Barbie movie. People have drawn comparisons to Elf. People have drawn comparisons. You could, quite frankly, every character has gone into the real world at some point, right? You're not riffing on one specific storyline. We've been doing character enters the real world. I mean, quite frankly, we've been doing it since Koko the Clown popped out of an Inkwell in a Fleischer cartoon, right? So instead of going, well, this is like what the Barbie movie did. First of all, this thing was in production or in development before the Barbie movie came out. And second, it's kind of like the Helen Kane lawsuit, where you kind of have to go, yeah, but let's look at who did that before that, right? Like, in a way, you're like, well, this is doing what this did. Yeah, but this is doing what this thing did, which this thing did, which this thing did, right? But that's the core plot of it, is her entering the real world and kind of learning about New York now, which also gives them an opportunity to do a lot of fun anachronism humor of old New York versus modern New York, which I have a lot of fun with. I do wonder, in a way, there are a number of New York specific jokes that do make me wonder, like, how will that play when it's on tour? But it played in Chicago well, and I don't think they changed the city to Chicago for the purposes of that show. So, in any event, I don't know if that answers your question 7 hours ago when you first asked it. But
I'm sure I will find something of substance there. No, I'm just
Great.
kidding. No,
Excellent.
it was good. It sounds like it's a good community theater crowd. It sounds like younger generations may struggle.
I think so. There were a lot of
appreciate the iconography, but
no, I will say a lot of kids. A lot of kids that
okay,
came to see. I think they're really marketing this towards the children. And quite frankly, there's a dog puppet on stage. You'll have a good time.
Do you think with this potential resurgence of Betty Boop, do you think that we will get the Barbie treatment for Boop? Do you think Boop will make an appearance in the Barbie sequel?
No.
Like how? No,
nothing like that. No, I do think like it is an attempt to do more with the IP, right? There's clearly an effort. I mean, Fleischer for the last couple of years there's been a renewed interest in Fleischer. There's a group that is doing some excellent restorations of these old Fleischer cartoons. They're trying to do a lot more with the brand. The show is clearly an attempt to kind of extend that IP, not in a cynical way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean that in a cynical way, but it is clearly an attempt to do something new with that IP. And you can see that in a lot of ways. A little thing that I noticed is if you look at the merchandise for Pudgy the dog, they've produced pins and plushes. His face is longer and less round, and his ears are a bit longer than they were in the old cartoons. And it struck me that might be because then you can kind of extend the trademark, or like, because it's a redesign of the character, and the original character is probably going to fall into the public domain within the next like 5 years. It's kind of like when Disney redesigns Mickey Mouse all the time. They copyright those as new characters. Which is why, like, if you have people are making like Steamboat Willie stuff because Steamboat Willie Mickey is in the public domain, but it has to be specifically Steamboat Willie Mickey. So I wonder if it's a play that way, that these kind of redesigns of these characters. Because I have to imagine if you are, of the Fleischer family or a fan of this, it's probably immensely frustrating that these characters did kind of slip into not just disuse, but into the public domain in a lot of senses, only to be kind of either misused or barely used.
Yeah, for sure.
And I do think this is a real effort to kind of reinvigorate that character in that way, which is great. Again, I mean, I'm trying to, if I was doing a written review, I would probably be more concise on certain things than in this more informal setting. But it is worth acknowledging. My audience had a blast. I had a blast. I am going to see it again in the next month or so. Because you gave me bright, colorful costumes. You gave me Busby Berkeley musical numbers. You gave me a finale that just leaves you walking out cheering and clapping. People people seem to be having a good time and enjoying themselves, and it did seem, again, there are a lot of families at this show that seem to be having a grand old time. I think it is a show that fundamentally kind of rejects cynicism. I don't mean that in some kind of like big, colorful, sentiment kind of way, but it is just like, this is not postmodernism, this is not ironic. This is something that, like, how do I put this? When I up top got a little mad about the people going, who asked for this? Right? I think some of that just comes out of like, yeah, if you go in and you want to just be like, why the hell do I want to see this? Yeah, it's not going to work for you, man. I don't know what to tell you, bud, but if and this is not the kind of thing, like, again, it's not ironic and it doesn't loan itself to irony, right? You have to go in going like, yes, I sincerely want to have a good time watching this.
Sure.
Right? I am sincerely going like, hey, I'm here. You're going to put on a show. I'm here to watch the show. And if you go in with that mindset, you're going to have a good time. And if you don't go in with that mindset, it's not going to work for you. You know what I mean? Like, but then again, what does? Right? Like, if you go into The Lion King and you sit there and go, that's not a giraffe, that's a guy with a tube holding up a giraffe head. Yeah, man, you're going to have a bad time. But you kind of have to go in and accept the conceit that giraffe puppet is a giraffe. You know what I mean? Like, you got to go in giving a little something to it, right?
Sure.
And I think that this invites that if you're open to it. It certainly clicks. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that surprised me the most, beyond just the lead performance, which is phenomenal, right? And the amount of, I don't want to say technical prowess, that sounds a little smug, but like the amount of effort that went into putting on a show and really like being a show. And the spectacle of it all, and the choreography and the colors and the lights, all of that. I think what really struck me is how much it really is interested in the medium of film translating it to stage. There are some pretty fun effects with the way that they transition from black and white to color. There is a lot of switching between monochrome and a full spectrum of color,
Okay.
which is a lot of fun. The use of screens for that effect, I don't want to give too much away, but there are other little nods to like doing cartoon stuff on a real stage that delighted me. And I've certainly seen some qualms about like, well, get a little chaotic, or it can, the book kind of takes some odd turns. And on the one hand, I agree. And on the other hand, I don't know, man, who cares? Shut up. Like, at a certain point, to one degree or another, you do have to accept what this thing is. And what this thing is a live action cartoon. And you got to just roll with it. And the show rolls with it, to its credit. The show, not that it's like ironic, but it does kind of acknowledge cartoon logic at various points. Right? It does kind of have little jokes and references to like things working out a little too neatly, right?
Sure.
In the way that a cartoon is, which I had a lot of fun with. But nevertheless, again, I answered your question and then just kept filibustering for 50 minutes. I apologize again. But
No, not at all. You're getting us prepared for our next episodes, so it's all good.
Oh, well, that's fair. That's fair. People don't know what that is in terms of recording order.
I know.
Need to. But we're playing a little fast and loose. But
we just got a letter.
Anyway.
Just got a letter.
That
was not a hint. We didn't get
No,
Steve.
we
If I got
did
Steve,
not.
I would myself. To be clear,
We did not.
One
That's
day.
a different.
That's a
different
season
dog
10.
sidekick.
It's true. Man.
But yeah, no,
God, that would be
I
a musical.
again, as I alluded, we are recording this before any kind of Tony nominations come out or anything like that, and I have not seen the current season of I haven't seen everything in the current season of theatrical offerings. But that said, I would be delighted to see this thing pick up a bunch of nominations. I think there's a lot of fun people in it. I think the costuming, the choreography would also just be. I'm gonna be 100% real with you, and people can come into the comments. It'd be dope if David Foster got a Tony Award, just because. Be dope. I don't know. The guy wrote the song for Karate Kid 2 and played with George Harrison. I'm fine with that. Again, I'm really reducing a storied career in music to just things that I happen to personally like, but it's fine. I'm going to completely leave out that he discovered Celine Dion and just focus on Karate Kid 2. That's just what I'm going to do. Work with me. But that all being said, if Jasmine Amy Rogers is not nominated for an award, this is just obscene. This is just, truth be told, that is a real case of like, if nothing else, you've got to see it for her. That is the ultimate special effect that this show has. And if, when she is done with this show, she is not in some movie or television show, the industry that I love has failed in some fundamental way. That is my opinion, quite frankly.
Wow,
and
okay.
that is somebody who, if people still made studio comedies, and particularly romantic comedies, if we still did that at the scale that we used to, that is somebody you can slot into that so easily. That is just would be perfect for that. We don't do that anymore because the film industry is fundamentally broken, and we don't know how to make 4-quadrant hits anymore, and we make everything for too big of budgets that it has to make way too much money. But if we did, that is somebody perfect for that. Not that I'm trying to steal them away from the theater by any stretch of the imagination, but that is somebody where you're just like, that is they need to be doing all things. And you know what? I'm going to say it. The same is true for Pudgy the dog puppet. I would like to see Pudgy the dog puppet appear in television and movies as well. Think about it, right? What is it? Handmaid's Tale is coming back for a final season. Put Pudgy the dog puppet in it. Put
Pudgy the dog in Abbott
puppet in it.
Elementary.
I sold. I'm in. You name a show, it's gonna be improved by Pudgy the dog puppet. That's my personal belief. There's not one show on television today. If Pudgy the dog was making sandwiches on the bear, I'd watch the bear. That's what I'm getting at.
I don't know. I know we said no spoilers, but at the end of the season finale of Daredevil Born Again, he does make an appearance. He says, "We're going to need some help here," and there's just a bunch of sirens that go off, and then he pulls open this bar door, and just in smack dab in the middle of the bar is Pudgy the dog, and everybody goes, "Whoa!" And it's crazy. If you've never seen anything like it.
I mean, again, it would get me to watch. That's all I'm saying. Hey, listen, I'm hip to it. Everybody's excited about Andor, right? Everybody is excited about Andor season 2. Listen, if you tell me that for every 10 minutes of watching a Star Wars character do a monologue that's a vague reference to Trotsky or something, that I'm also going to get to see Pudgy the dog, I'm going to watch Andor season 2. Fine. I'll do it. You know? Fine. I'm in. Put him in more things. That's my opinion. Is this the part where I should just like give my final verdict on this? Have we gone on long enough about Pudgy the dog and Daredevil?
I mean, listen. All in all, it sounds like it's thus far your favorite show you've seen on Broadway this year.
Yeah. Oh, undoubtedly. This is, but I don't know if I'm not going to say that as though like that's the ringing endorsement because
definitive.
It's like, I just mean it more in like this is so playing in my specific wheelhouse.
Correct.
Right?
And you're talking to somebody that has seen two of the biggest names right now that are likely going to get nominated in the same breath as Betty Boop. John Proctor is the villain, and of course O'Mary. So, to hear you speak
thankfully
so
in a different category, to be clear.
Of course, yes. No, of course, yes. So to know that you speak as strongly about it in the way that people are speaking about those shows gives me confidence. Now,
I mean, I'll I'll say this.
I can tell you from what I've heard, it's gonna get more nominations than Redwood. So
I didn't want to throw anything under the bus. But
I'm not
you
throwing
know,
anything under the bus. I'm just saying Boop will get more nominations than Redwood. That's
It
all
is-
I'm saying.
Again, I mean, I guess that's kind of my standard to a degree too. Is anytime I see like, who was asking for this? A lady hugs a tree. What are we doing? Just shut up. No, I mean, like, I'll say this to it. Like, the finale song has been stuck in my head for weeks. It's been like lodged in my brain. I am. Like I said, I'm seeing it again. I'm taking family to see it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I'm looking forward to what I pick up a second time around too. What little Easter eggs I pick up on the next time. You know, what little background things. But the thing again, you know, the thing I think about too when I'm thinking about a show in this regard is, you know, we're New Yorkers. We can see a million things, right? If we really want to, and we hit the lottery, we can see a lot of things. What I think about is like the people who are traveling. Right? The people who are coming in to see something, are they going to leave satisfied? Right? And I think this is absolutely like that's the big thing is if you go see it, right? If you're traveling from out of town and you're just like picking something, you know, off of the list, right? Or you're just picking something you're familiar with, you're gonna leave the theater in a good mood and you're gonna come home from your trip and say, I had a wonderful time. Right? I had a blast. I had, you know, puts you in a good mood when you leave. It's like, and there are shows that do it. 42nd Street is a perfect example, right? When they adapted 42nd Street for the stage,
Yeah.
when we were young, and people went to go see it. Are you gonna sit down and say like, when I saw 42nd Street, it changed who I was as a human being? No, 42nd Street is not about, you know. That show did not exist to make you meditate on the meaning of existence, right? They sang Lullaby of Broadway, and you left in a great mood, and you had a good rest of your week, right? You had a good time. This is that, you know. You leave in a good mood. I'm not gonna say. A pull quote that I hate is anytime you see like, this is what we need right now, you know, because everybody says it for everything. I heard that evoked for the Minecraft movie recently with somebody going, well, this is what we need right now. And it's, come on, man. What are we doing? But in the sense of when you look at the role that Betty Boop, the character, filled in her time during the Great Depression, right? And you look at the role that this character has kind of played throughout, and you look at other examples, again, a thing like an Annie, or you look at like the Depression era films that I love, like Footlight Parade and Gold Diggers of 1933, right? These are things that are touching on the times. You know, the Boop musical does actually touch on New York not being run super great. You know,
Yeah.
it's it weirdly, even though this thing has been in development for 10 years, the plot does hinge on a mayoral race where no one is thrilled with the candidates, which worked out timing wise, you know, where you're just like, oh, okay. And Betty kind of recognizing, well, there's a lot of economic inequality in the city. And you're like, yeah, amen, brother.
Yep.
It's like, you know, does Betty Boop, you know, open Ezra Klein's Abundance on stage and just start reading it? No, not quite. But it does accidentally stumble into topicality from time to time in that way they couldn't have anticipated. But ultimately, it touches on troubling things to leave you in a better mood, right? To just kind of go, just have fun. Here's some colors. Remember why you enjoy being alive. And in that sense, it is the thing we need right now. It's a reminder. It reminds you why it's good to have fun. It reminds you why it's nice to feel happy sometimes, you know? Yeah. So credit is credit. Credit where credit is due for that. I guess to wrap it up, as we've been going on for quite a bit, we've given you the history of the character. We've told you what this is about. If you're a film history buff, if you're an animation history buff, I promise you, it actually is way more interested in representing that than you might anticipate. And if you're just a person in New York for whatever reason, looking to have a good time, you could find nothing more delightful and more just leaving you in a good mood than this turned out to be. So I am pleasantly surprised at how much I ended up enjoying myself with that whole production, and I hope that it has a nice long run to it, with the exception of let me pet the dog puppet. That's my big takeaway here. Let me pet the puppet.
You heard it here, folks.
Let me pet the puppet.
Sideshow puppet.
Let me pet the puppet.
Side door puppet.
Let me pet him. He's a good dog. Go see the show. Thanks for checking this out. This rather unusual bonus episode for us. We appreciate you guys checking it out and letting us try something a little different. Normally our show is about the films of the National Film Registry. That's what it was last week. That's what it's going to be again next week. I believe in our release order. We will be back next week to talk about An American in Paris, which itself was adapted into a Broadway musical. So it all kind of ties together. So join us next week. We'll be talking about An American in Paris. Thank you guys for checking this out. And if you're in New York, go see the show. It's fun.
See y'all next week. You're Missing Out is a production of Neon Night Media. It's hosted by Mike Natale and Tom Lorenzo. The show is produced by Kyle Lampar and edited by Mike Natale and Kyle Lampar. More information about our hosts and guests are in the show notes. Thank you to Amanda Rush for our social media, and all of you for checking us out.
If you're listening right now or want to take the show on the go, every episode is available as an audio podcast. Follow You're Missing Out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a review and a rating. It helps folks find the show.
Want to watch the show or watch some of the films along with us? Great, that's why we're doing this. Don't leave us alone out here. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got video versions of every episode, uploads of some of the National Film Registry titles we're discussing, commentary tracks, and live streams. And once a month, I'll be uploading some content that's exclusive to the YouTube channel. So be sure to click subscribe and hit that little bell to be notified as soon as new stuff goes up. Because, let's be real, I ain't sticking to a schedule.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you next time.
And you'll see us next time. Because we don't watch you, you're watching us.